all the variant routes of Eastern Imperial Highway. And the most important thing that besides the battles fought along the Southern Ganges route, it shows the importance of the Southern Ganges route, that is the Eastern Imperial Highway of the Mughal period. We can see the series of battles took place there. Battle of Surajgarh in 1534, that is between Munger and Patna. Battle of Chausa, where Humayun was defeated, that is also along the Eastern Imperial Highway. Then second battle of Surajgarh took place in 1557 between Muhammad Shah Adil and the Bengal Sultan Bahadur Shah. Yes. And Battle of Tukarwai, Battle of Rajmal, these are all decisive battles. Then there was the Jharkhand route also. Jharkhand route was not there was no highway before 1763. But after 1763, we can see there are the two highways were developed. One was the new military road in the 1785 to 1830 by the British East India Company. In that route, Hazaribagh was the important town. And secondly, Grand Trunk Road was developed in 1832 onwards. So Grand Trunk Road connecting with Calcutta to Sherghati to Sasara. That is one of the new alignment done across Jharkhand. That is the second route. So this is the Mughal and colonial highways of Eastern India. In the red line, that is the actual Eastern Imperial Highway which Sher Shah actually built up. Sher Shah had no relation with Calcutta. Hence Grand Trunk Road, it was built by English East India Company. That was the second route across Jharkhand, and the first route was the new military road.
Please conclude.
Thanks.
So, thank you. We have a lot of time to the whole problem. Otherwise, we will be very happy to listen to papers like this for a longer time because it will be beneficial for youngsters, everyone. But then you also understand the constraint that we have. We have plenty of papers and everybody should have a chance because it's only one way that we get. Otherwise, this was cannot be stopped and we can go on for some more time also. It is very interesting. Notwithstanding the kind of interest that it evokes us, this also should have the chance. So, it is so explicit, I think there are no doubts over it. We'll move on to the other paper. So, the other paper will be
so number 31.
yes. Is it Palghat?
Kim Singh, sir.
Pardon?
Kim Singh. Number 31.
Number 31. There are two places where the numbers are given. That is about confusion. Pardon? Your name?
Kim Singh, 31.
So page 28.
Page number 28. 21 says.
Kim Singh will present later on.
Good morning. My paper is an interesting unpublished copper plate inscription of Raja Pritam Singh of Kullu. There are not many copper plate inscriptions that have survived from the former kingdom of Kullu. Some of them are known since the completions of Hutchison and Boggar's history of the Punjab regions. In a recent study, many Mughal inscriptions from Kullu have been studied, but the non-copper plates have not been totally deciphered and studied. One such copper plate is briefly mentioned by Hiranand in Hutchison and Boggar. Till now, the whereabouts of the copper plate was unknown. The copper plate is in the possessions of the Kardar of the Muridhara temple at Hava. It is inscribed in Taki script and the language used is the Kulvi, a dialect of the Western Ghats. The translation is called the great king of kings, the sovereign king, the holy one, Dakshatha's son, Shri Ramchandra's servant, Pritam Singh has donated villages to God Muridhara of Thava as per ancient authoritative custom. Among the two villages are named Achali and Agaro, situated before Nal. Among donated villages include Bhatna, which is situated before Mandalgarh. If anyone from Jagat Singh's family is suspicious about it on the granted villages to Muridhara, it would be a betrayal towards Shri Muridhara. These villages have borne the expenses of Shri Muridhara since long. Now these expenses would be continued to be borne as per earlier original and authoritative custom. It is certified if the Kamdaras spent the income from on their own benefits. They would be betraying the God Buddha as well as the king of Kulu. If there would be an increase in the offering of the temple inadvertently, in that case it would be considered the mistake of the Bhandari. The offerings could be taken by the Kamdara, Bhata Pujari and Panditas. All the utensils used and unused had to be cleaned. If any utensil is lost, the Kamdara and Bhata Pujari and water carriers would be considered as betraying. The auspicious king came personally to Thawa village and guaranteed these villages. Written in the Sambat 56, Maksar Pravishte 12, equivalent to the AD 1780 in the month of March year. Granted to Shri Muralidhara for auspicious of Dharma. It is clearly known from the above translation that the Shraddha bears the title Shri Mahar, Shri Param Bhatarak, Shri Maharaja Dhiraj, Shri Maharaja and Raja Pritam Singh is simply referred to as a Ghulam of Rama. In this okay. Okay, sir, thank you.
So nice. Very good. So, any question on this? Presentation. Nice. Thank you very much. Now we move on to
Take this.
we will announce name as well as
Hello, good morning. I will summarize within 2 or 3 minutes my paper.
yes.
There is a few emergency. The title of my paper is Either to Unpublished Copper Plates on Inscription of Raja Pritam Singh of Chamba, Himachal Pradesh. I will divide my presentation in 3 parts. First one will be introduction of the copper plates in the term of Indian history and copper plate discussion about the term of Western Himalaya, and lastly I will go on my conclusion session. Among the metals, the copper was the most common writing detail in the ancient and medieval time in India. Similarly, by so far, the copper plate was the most common metal used in the inscriptions. When we studied the copper plate inscription of the Western Himalayan region, the large number of copper plate inscriptions are found in Chamba region. Eminent scholar and archaeologist J.V.H. Fogel, in his course of his research, has been able to collect 82 copper plate inscriptions, of which 5 belong to pre-Muslim and 77 from medieval period. Fogel deciphered and documented earlier copper plate inscription, and in his book Antiquity of Chamba State Part 1, published in 1911 by Archaeological Survey of India. After then, Chavda also covered and deciphered 82 copper plate inscriptions of medieval and late medieval period. As the custom of issue such documents was kept up till the end of the last century. Now I am going to introduce this copper plate. This copper plate belonged to Raja Pritam Singh of Chamba and is now kept in the Bhuri Singh Museum. And I had good fortune to examine this copper plate and read its contents on January 2019 with the great cooperation of research assistant of concerned museum. The plate, which is inscribed on single side, is the landscape orientation size of copper plate about 23.3 centimeter height, wide 23.5 centimeter wide, actually in the handle of its left. The language of the copper plate is partly Sanskrit and partly Chambiali. There are also mentioned some numerals in the inscription such as 2, 3 and 9. The record is dated is the Shastra Samvat 39, Vikrami Samvat 1722, and which may be held equivalent to 1663 AD. Now I am going to what is the historical importance of this copper plate inscriptions. These copper plate inscriptions are most of the significant epigraphical sources of the history of any region and any kingdom. So are the copper plate inscriptions of Chamba region. Since the published by J.P.S. Fogel and B.C. Chavda works, many copper plate inscriptions are found in Chamba region as compared to neighboring region of the Western Himalaya. All copper plate inscriptions are historically significant because these inscriptions have detailed description regarding contemporary rulers of their polity, detailed descriptions of the rural landscape, and economic detail of other perspectives. Okay, thank you.
So now we move on to the next paper. Miss Mini Vishwakarma. And paper is Hinduओं के बीच रक्तदान संस्कार.
I'm sorry, sir, I was not following this list.
No, there are few changes. There are few changes because split into two sections.
No, sir, I am in this section only, but I don't think we are following this.
We are not strictly following that because there are some constraints. That's why I asked, are you in hurry? You said no.
Yes, sir, I know. You will ask me, sir. I know.
We are not following the same
Okay, sir.
system. She has booked her ticket, etc. She is late.
And also there is
Right.
also divided into two sections.
The table is also divided into two sections. Up to 100 it is here.
Sir, I am under
Within the
100.
100. Within the 100. That is why I asked. Are you in hurry? After 100 it is the next one. After 100.
I am
Here. You are here.
Yeah, I am here.
Yes, which is clear. So Vinay will start now. You take 4-5 minutes. And you promised 2 minutes, but I am sure you did not. You take 4 minutes. Yes, right.
गुड मॉर्निंग एवरीवन। मेरा टॉपिक है हिंदुओं के बीच गर्भाधान संस्कार। वैसे तो ये संस्कार सभी जातियों में एक महत्वपूर्ण संस्कार है, लेकिन ये संस्कार जो है श्रेष्ठ संतान उत्पन्न करने के लिए किया जाता था। मध्यकालीन भारत में इस संस्कार के लिए पुरुषों की आयु कम से कम 25 वर्ष और स्त्रियों की आयु को 16 वर्ष माना गया था। अथर्ववेद में भी इस संस्कार के संकेत मिलते हैं, क्योंकि विवाह से स्त्री और पुरुष सर्वथा इस प्रकार से प्रयत्न करते हैं कि दोनों एक दूसरे से कभी भी पृथक रूप से आचरण न करें। राजबली पांडे ने विचार व्यक्त किया है कि संतति प्राप्त करना प्रत्येक व्यक्ति का आवश्यक कर्तव्य समझा जाता था। यह कर्तव्य गर्भाधान से ही संभव था, इसलिए अनेक स्त्रियों को गर्भाधान करने के लिए बुलाया जाता था। अश्विन देवता से गर्भ की रक्षा की प्रार्थना करते हुए 10वें मास में होने वाली संतान को बुलाया गया है। एक अन्य प्रार्थना से भी हमें पता चलता है कि 100 वर्ष के भीतर ही बच्चा पैदा होता है, वो पिता बनता है, इसलिए देवताओं से ये प्रार्थना की गई थी कि इसे नष्ट न किया जाए। गर्भाधान संस्कार के बाद सुखपूर्वक प्रसव के लिए भी देवताओं से प्रार्थना की गई थी कि जब भी बच्चे का जन्म हो वो जीवित ही हो। विष्णु ने गर्भाधान और निश्चय को समानार्थक माना है। इस संस्कार के दिन पति और पत्नी दोनों यज्ञ करते हैं और विशिष्ट मंत्रों का पाठ करते हुए आहुतियां दी जाती हैं। इन मंत्रों में श्रेष्ठ संतान प्राप्ति हेतु परमात्मा से प्रार्थना की जाती है। पुत्र प्राप्ति हेतु ऋतुकाल से 6ठी, 8वीं, 10वीं, 12वीं, 14वीं और 16वीं रात्रि में गर्भाधान करना चाहिए, जबकि पुत्री की इच्छा होने पे 5वीं, 7वीं, 9वीं और 15वीं रात्रि में गर्भाधान का निर्देश है। जबकि अष्टमी, चतुर्दशी, अमावस्या और पूर्णमासी की रातों को इसे निषेध माना गया है। प्रारंभ से चले आ रहे इस गर्भाधान संस्कार का मध्यकाल में उल्लेख करते हुए अरब यात्री अलबरूनी ने लिखा है कि ब्राह्मण का यह कर्तव्य है कि वह संतान प्राप्ति के लिए गर्भाधान संस्कार करे। गर्भवती स्त्री को कुल का प्रतिष्ठापक समझा जाता था और गर्भ की सुरक्षा की जाती थी। वेनिस संहार में भी द्रौपदी अपने पुत्र वधु उत्तरा के गर्भाधान के 4थे मास में सुभद्रा को उसकी सावधानी पूर्वक रक्षा करने की सलाह देती है। इस अवस्था में स्त्रियों को कई कठिनाइयों का सामना करना पड़ा था, इसलिए उन्होंने अपने पुरुष संबंधियों से सहायता की मांग की थी। यह एक पति पत्नी का मिलन के बाद होता था और इसमें पत्नियों को अलंकृत रहने की सलाह दी जाती थी। पति पत्नी को आदेश देता था कि गर्भावस्था के समय वो आनंद और प्रसन्नता से रहे और मन को शिव संकल्पों वाला रखे, ताकि वो गर्भाधान के बाद बच्चों का पालन पोषण में तत्पर रह सके। परिवार में संतान उत्पत्ति के विषय में अलबरूनी ने लिखा है कि ब्राह्मण का यह कर्तव्य था कि वह संतान उत्पत्ति के लिए अपनी पत्नी के साथ रहे, लेकिन वह शर्म के कारण ऐसा नहीं करता है। इस प्रकार हम पाते हैं कि गर्भाधान संस्कार संतान प्राप्ति हेतु पत्नी के साथ संपन्न किया। यह एक यज्ञ है जो पूर्वत की भांति मध्यकाल में भी बना रहा, लेकिन लज्जा के वश यह ब्राह्मणों द्वारा नहीं किया जाता। थैंक यू।
we'll again get back to Indira. Indira is not there.
So I don't mind if it goes line by line. I have that much time, but I
Then we're very thankful to you for this interview. Mr. Nagendra Rao. Hira Nawaz is.
Title is not changed. Title is also changed.
Title is Epigraphic Evidence of Language, Scripts and Calligraphy of Sultanate.
List of original title.
Slide change. Yes.
Good morning, Chairperson and delegates. My topic is epigraphic evidence of language, scripts and calligraphy of Southern period. I divided my paper in 3 parts: language, scripts and calligraphy. Inscription furnished valuable information besides administrative or provincial nature about the linguistic development during the Sultanate period. Being official documents, the number of Arabic Persian inscription increases under the Sultans of Delhi. Thus, the large number of inscriptions recorded in Arabic, Persian and Sanskrit during the Sultanate period. The recorded epigraphs were written in Persian language of various scripts: Naskh, Tulat and Nastali and Sanskrit. Muslim immigrants spoke Persian, Arabic language has a special degree on account of language of religion. The oldest documents in Arabic language dated back to 6th century were 2 inscriptions and were noted from Haran and Damascus, and 3 recently discovered inscriptions are found from the Saudi Arabia. Arabic language and script must have been spread throughout the world of Arabia shortly after the Islamic conquest. Arabic as a language introduced to India by the Arabs, merchants and commanders in the 8th century. Thus, in the western provinces, Arabic continued to establish till the last quarter of 10th century, when the Turkish rulers, the Ghaznavids and Ghurids introduced Persian as administrative as spoken language. Persian as a language had its ancient incident and course of time became an official language of Sassanid kings of Persia, which is evident from the inscription engraved on the rock of Persepolis. The Ghaznavids introduced Persian as administrative language, and India followed the Persianized culture, which continued during the Sultanate period. As a result, the Ghaznavids court culture produced the first renowned Persian poet, Masood, Shah Sulman in Lahore, and Amir Khusro in Delhi under the Delhi Sultanate. Side by side, Sanskrit being a language of Indian religion and Indian elite class also flourished, and Sanskrit received attention of the Delhi Sultans, as is evident from the Sanskrit inscriptions which has been engraved by the order of Sultans of Delhi. Both Arabic and Persian language brought India by the Muslim invaders. The first epigraph recorded written in both Arabic and Persian, which are found on Qutub Minar and Quwwatul Islam Mosque respectively, but Arabic remained in vogue till the time of Balban. Arabic script developed from Nabatean script, which was prevalent in northern Arabia in pre-Islamic period, sometimes around 608 AD. The early Arabic script was developed in Kufa, a city of Iraq. Thus, the script received its name Kufi. The Kufi is bold, angular, and majestic, and used as on architecture, engraving titles, etc. Kufi is easy to recognize, and that it's angular, using large horizontal and short vertical lines and curves. The first Kufic inscriptions we notice from the Quwwatul Islam Mosque and Qutub Minar on the arm of the Arabica Chopra, which the first was in Indian subcontinent. The Kufic was replaced by the Naskh, and first Naskh inscriptions we notice from Quwwatul Islam Mosque. The ornamental style of Naskh is called Qult, means 1/3, and the period from the 14th century onwards is important for the introduction of evolution of Qult, which is evident from the epigraphs belonging to Tughlaq period executed in Naskh letter mark the transition period of Naskh. As soon as Qult script came to be used the historical purpose, the Naskh was kept for the religious texts. By the 14th century, a new script of writing developed, which replaced the earlier Naskh, is Nastaliq. Nastaliq is a compound of Arabic script, Naskh, and Persian script. Taliq is called Nastaliq. And the first inscriptions which is noticed in Nastaliq are found in the Balban period of Delhi Sultanate. The style of writing of this inscription is spurious jumble of Naskh and Nastali. The first Nastalic record is found from the Balban period, which was popularized in 16th century by the Mughal period of calligraphy. Sanskrit language was also carried out by the Delhi Sultans, which could be evident from their Sanskrit inscriptions in the particular reign. The first Sanskrit epigraphs of the Delhi Sultanate is recorded in Nagrik script, notice from Qutub Minar. This language and its script further carried out by the succeeding rulers of Sultanate period, which is evident from the same monuments Qutub Minar. For example, inscription of Qutubuddin Aibak, Alauddin Khilji, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, etc. And the script of calligraphy, I am coming towards calligraphy. The script of calligraphy is now known as Tugra. The distinct style of this calligraphy rose out of the Arabic writing, to which A.K. Bhattacharya says that the Tugra means an imperial signature on the royal title, prefix the letter. The Tugra is ornamental writing in which the letters are interwoven as to assume decorative shape, which is difficult to read. Tugra style can be decorated in any shape. It is interesting to note. Yes, sir. It is interesting to note that the earliest inscription in Tugra styles found from the Bihar Sharif during the Balban period. Thus, the Muslim kings of India loved to ornament their mosques and tombs with inscription consisting of Quranic verses, Hadith, Muslims, Greeks, and moral teaching, etc. Thank you.
Come here. Take your.
Now we will move on to this Indira. Indira was not present when her name was not. Today there is some confusion because there are two rooms, you know.
What is the number?
Indira, we have to take only maximum 5 minutes. And I am very happy if you are finishing 4 minutes.
30?
Title is Aisala. She will read out her title.
Good morning, Chairperson, Co-Chairpersons, delegates. I'm Dr. Indira from Usman University. My paper is based on Risala-i-Miqdariya. It is a manuscript. It's a manuscript compiled by Mir Momin Astrabadi, who was an Iranian Afakai. He migrated to Qutub Shahi period Golconda, Deccan, during the period of Qutub Shahis, so in 16th century. Here we see that Mir Momin Al-Husseini Astrabadi, he penned down the Risala-i-Miqdariya during 1625. It is a treatise on weights and measures compiled by him. He was the Peshwa, he was the philanthropist, he was very much took part in town planning Hyderabad. He himself gave the name as Ispane now to Hyderabad. So Hyderabad is given by him. He belongs to Astrabad village in Iran. So there we see this manuscript is available in Salajang Museum, Hyderabad. Manuscript number 127, Kitla. And this is of 17 pages manuscript. It is divided into 3 chapters. So we see
Chapters or divisions?
Chapters.
We have to wait for you to finish.
Is it thesis or article?
It's an article. So brief and presentation.
Because when you
It is divided.
chapters, I was afraid that
So it is divided into 3 chapters. Muqaddamah, that is the preface, then part of the measurements part, and Khatima, that is conclusion. So in the preface we see that he has given on about the Muhammad Quli Qutb Shah, as he was telling the manuscript was endorsed by this the Darazan Tasnif Mir Momin Peshwa Rahmatullah while Nuskaye Mutabarik Bakht Mursanif Asht. It means that measurements measured by Mir Momin Peshwa Rahmatullah, that this was the authentic codex written by him after doing much research. So what are these 12 standard measures of Risala Migdariya? So this Risala Migdariya of 12 standards divided into 12 chapters, and each chapter is telling about each measurement with authentic research and the appropriate weights. So the 12 standard measures are Habba. Habba weight is equal to 1 jaw 1 oat. Tasu weight 2 jaw, that is 2 oats. Hirat weight 4 jaw 4 oats. Danik dang 8 jaw. Dirham 48 jaw 48 oats. Mishkal weight 68 jaw 68 oats. Star weight 4.5 मिसकाल ओकिया रतल मन खैलजिया मकू. These are the 12 standard weights which we see in the works, and still in Hyderabad we see these names are still, many of the names are existing. In the second part of the chapter he mentioned about the distances of roads. It is measured in like Dutch furlong is equal to 1 mile. So we see it is still in Hyderabad, we see this 8 furlong, 2 furlong is used. So still they are writing Mir Momin Hyderabad Risala Migdariya. These words are still used in Hyderabad. And the third chapter is with consists of weights like Mashat, Ek Maap. Ek Maap we still continue in telling Ek Maap is equal to like glass vessel. So it's like, so the last pages of manuscripts on page number 13-14 he has told about that this is the authentic work, and he wrote Mahare Suleiman Zak Gast Mayassar Mera. So he declared that this book is the authentic work. So I would like to say that Risala Migdariya in Persian language is one of the major important works which was done during the Qutb Sahib at Golconda, Deccan. It is because there was Islamic jurisprudence. According to the Islamic jurisprudence, there were no authentic weights during that time. So Ashrabadi has done an excellent work to bring about the authentic measurements. Thank you.
Very good. Murugan.
Forty-one, 42, sir. Should I come?
Yes. But only thing is you forget after starting.
No, sir, I don't know. My paper is on a, good morning, my name is Rafia. My paper is on a administrative class in the Delhi Sultanate. This was known by the name of the Amirane Sada. And this is basically, we know about this class during the Tughlaq period from 3 important texts of that period. One of them is Balni, another is the Sami, and yet another is Batika. These 3 texts refer to this community of people who are known as the Amirane Sada, and who were important because they caused a number of who are important because they caused a number of rebellion during the 14th century in regions like Dhar, Malwa and Gujarat. So So, the important thing about these rebellions and the people who caused this rebellion is that it is basically argued, like even in texts like Andrew Ring, and even in earlier texts like K.M. Nizami's very important legendary work on the Delhi Sultanate, it is usually argued that these are people who are basically referred to as riffraff, people who did not really have a standing, who were recent migrants and who came and who just rebelled. And joined with whoever was in power. However, if you look at three of these rebellions and you look at the people who actually caused these rebellions, you see that they were people who are importantly not riffraff. Secondly, they are people who have a lot of experience in living in the provinces of the Delhi Sultanate. So they are not people who reside in the capital. They do not